David here with Figboot on Pens, back again with another ink review. Today I have for you a brand new limited edition Halloween themed ink from Papier Plume, appropriately named Bloody Pumpkin. Papier Plume does a really good job of coming out with many different limited edition inks. In the past, they've released inks for specific fountain pen shows. They've been releasing a few inks for their classic New Orleans lineup. They recently released an interesting black-green called Iron Lace. And they produce a new ink each year on the anniversary of their retail location in New Orleans. These anniversary inks have been pretty cool. A couple of years ago, they had number 11, the Stranger Things themed ink, and earlier this year they had the number 13 mystery color. If you haven't had a chance to check out that review, it was a lot of fun to put together. It was an ink where you didn't know what the color was until you received it. So I had an issue. How do I review an ink that I can't show? Because I didn't want to spoil the surprise. Well, if you check out their review, you'll see how I tackled that issue. But back to the matters at hand, their latest ink release, which will be available beginning today. And to get a closer look at the spooky Bloody Pumpkin, please join me over here at camera 2. So here we have the ink. This is Papier Plume Bloody Pumpkin. The first thing right away that I noticed is one thing, I always love Papier Plume's wax seals that they put on the top here. And rather than their normal fleur-de-lis, this one has a nice happy pumpkin, which I thought was kind of interesting. And you can see here that it's a nice Halloween theme with a little jack-o'-lantern in here. And then an axe in the jack-o'-lantern, hence the name, the Bloody Pumpkin, a little blood coming out. So what does this ink look like? As you can imagine, it is kind of a reddish orange. In regard to some other kind of either red or orange inks, here it is with Diamine Pumpkin, which is more of kind of a true pumpkin color and not as much of a red. Here it is with Noodler's Apache Sunset, which is a little bit lighter on the red side. Here it is with the Papier Plume House of the Rising Sun. It's fairly similar to that, though the House of the Rising Sun I'd say is a little more orange and a little more saturated. In regard to blood, this is Diamine's Ox Blood, which obviously is much more red. Here is Van Ness's Good Evening, which is their take on the Mont Blanc Hitchcock ink, which is more of kind of a reddish brown blood. And then this is it with Three Oysters Chili Red. This is what the ink looks like on some 52-gram Tomoe River paper. Here it is with a swab, and this is it with more of a smear. And you can tell it is a rather watery ink, and that when you have a little bit more application, then you are going to get some shading out of there. In regard to some bleed through, there is a bit here on this Tomoe River paper, but this is rather thin paper. And as I said, the ink is a little bit on the wet side, and I do apply quite a bit for these particular samples. So here we have Papier Plume Bloody Pumpkin. For this top portion here, I used this Pilot Parallel. This time I used the 3.8 millimeter. I do think it's interesting how the ink doesn't quite like the lines here on this Rhodia 80-gram paper. It doesn't necessarily mix well with that with the ink that they use for the lines. But you can see here with the more passes, there is quite a bit of shading that is on this particular ink. And as you can see with these bottom portions here, when there's a stronger application, you're going to get a lot more shading. As I mentioned, this is Rhodia 80-gram paper. The ghosting and bleed on the Rhodia paper is rather low, even though, like I said, this is rather a wet ink, that it's virtually non-existent here on this Rhodia. The shade, I'd say medium-high, basically leaning towards the high side. And in regard to sheen, I'd say that that is on the low side. In regard to pens, we have a couple of different pens that we're going to be taking a look at today. First of all, I thought we'd have a pen that was red, and that is the Visconti Homo Sapiens Magma. And this is the Visconti. We'll just say Homo Sapiens. And this is an extra fine nib, and a very nice extra fine nib at that. Next up is, I figured we needed some more Halloween colors, so besides red, we also have black and orange in this Delta Dolce Vita. This is the oversized model. So we have the Delta Dolce Vita, and this is the oversize. And this is a medium gold nib. And then finally, we have a black pen, which is the Lamy 2000. And this one here, we'll just say this is the Lamy 2000. And this is a double broad nib. In regard to some writing samples, I thought I would do some Halloween-themed quotes, or at least for some Halloween-themed productions or movies. So the first one here is, and this person said, "I am the ghost with the most, babe." And that person was Beetlejuice. Did I misspell this? G-E-U-S-E. Yes, that's a hard one to spell. And this is from the movie Beetlejuice. This is a little weird, just because the character is spelled like the star, but then in the name of the movie is Beetlejuice. And then actually in the titles, when they introduced Michael Keaton's character, it was two words, Beetle and Juice. So I think they basically just chalked it up to a production choice. Why there's a little contradiction in there between the two names, just because if you went with the name Beetlegeist or Beetlejuice, like the star, that it's kind of hard to say and hard to pronounce, as well as hard to spell, as I showed right there. Okay, now in regard to the Delta, this character said, "That's right, I am the Pumpkin King." And that character would be Jack Skellington. And that was from A Nightmare Before Christmas. We'll just say A Nightmare Before Christmas. Even though it has Christmas in the title, that is really more of a Halloween movie. If you haven't seen it, that's a really solid movie and something that's fun for the whole family to watch. And finally, for the Lamy, said double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble, which is something you always hear witches say, but do you know where that originated and where that came from? Well, it was the three witches from Macbeth, the Shakespeare play. Okay, in regard to this ink, I find the flow to be fairly high. It is a rather wet ink, In regard to drying time, it's not that much on the extra fine nib. I mean, it wasn't laying down tons of ink, but pretty much after 10 seconds, it was dry. And for medium, it took between 15 and 30 seconds, which is pretty standard. I said here that Papier Plume Bloody Pumpkin is a heavy shading ink with a decent flow. It is a fun way to celebrate Halloween from the safety of your own home. Okay, in regard to a water test, let's actually add some dots in here. And then we'll add a little bit of water. And as that sits here just for a second, let's take a look at some chromatography. I always enjoy doing these chromatographies and am interested how they turn out. This particular one, since it is an orange red, I would expect there to be some red as well as a little bit of yellow. And as you can see, that is what this ink is made out of. And this is what the chromatography ended up looking like. It surprised me because it was a little more kind of rose-ish than I thought it would be before it goes into some more of the maroon and then a touch of the yellow, which then brings the orange element into play. And then with the water test, it pretty much mostly came off. Now, they don't profess that this is a waterproof ink, but it doesn't necessarily hold up to water. So there we have Papier Plume Bloody Pumpkin. As I mentioned before, this is a limited edition ink, and those have a tendency to be fairly popular and go rather quickly. And so that if this is something that interests you, I'd strongly recommend you take action sooner rather than later so that you can, one, receive this by Halloween, and then also it's probably not going to be around for that much longer. So it's one of those things you want to take advantage of while you can. So until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.